Before Harlem ever knew his name, before the suits, the numbers game, the prison bids, the street wars, there was a boy born in a small South Carolina town who the world had already decided would amount to nothing. His name was Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, but the streets would call him Bumpy. And the reason he left South Carolina, the real reason, is the story that made everything else possible. October 31st, 1905. Halloween. Some people later said that was a sign. Ellsworth Johnson was born in Camden, South Carolina, a small town in Kershaw County built on the bones of the plantation era. His parents, Margaret and Weenie Johnson, were hard-working, God-fearing people, and they were black in a state that had engineered a very specific future for black people, one with a very low ceiling. Jim Crow laws in South Carolina weren't just uncomfortable, they were a system, a deliberately constructed architecture of limitations, legal, social, economic, designed to tell black children one thing every single day of their lives. There is no future here for you. You could not sit at the same counter. You could not attend the same school. You could not vote. You could not own land without harassment. You could not look a white man in the eye without risking your life. Bumpy Johnson was a curious child. His mother gave him books. His father gave him a work ethic. Camden gave him a ceiling. And from a very early age, something in Ellsworth Johnson refused to accept that ceiling as permanent. There's a story, and those who studied Bumpy Johnson's life have pieced it together from accounts of people who knew him, about something that happened when he was around 10 years old. He was walking with his older brother when a white man deliberately bumped into them on the sidewalk. His brother, like most black men in the South had been trained to do, looked at the ground and apologized. And the man walked on, satisfied. Bumpy didn't look at the ground. He looked directly at the man. His brother pulled him away fast, terrified, and later told him, "Boy, are you trying to get us both killed?" And by every account of the man Bumpy Johnson would become, his answer, even at 10 years old, was something close to, "I'm not looking at the ground for anybody." That was the transaction Camden was offering. Your dignity, in exchange for your safety, every single day. And Bumpy Johnson, from childhood, decided he wasn't going to make that trade. The question was, what do you do when the place you were born is break you? Around 1919, Bumpy's older brother William had already gone north, to Harlem, New York, and the letters he sent back home did something to the young Ellsworth Johnson that no sermon, no schoolbook, no conversation in Camden ever could. They gave him proof. William wrote about black doctors in Harlem, black lawyers, black men who owned buildings, men who walked on any sidewalk they chose, men who were not invisible. The Great Migration was the largest internal movement of people in American history. Between 1910 and 1970, over 6 million black Americans left the South. They weren't just running from poverty. They were running from a system that had been carefully designed to ensure poverty had no exit. Bumpy Johnson read William's letters and understood something fundamental. The world Camden had described, where his place was fixed, low, and permanent, was a lie. A regional lie, maintained by violence and law and habit. But a lie. And if it was a lie, it could be walked away from. In 1919, Bumpy Johnson, 13 years old, witnessed a mob. A white mob, moving through his neighborhood, dragging a black man from his home. His crime, by the accounts of the time, amounted to little more than being visible in the wrong way. Bumpy watched. He didn't run. He stood in the shadows and he counted the men. By his own account, years later, he remembered the number, 41. There are moments that don't break a person. They clarify them. They burn away everything that was uncertain and leave behind only what's essential. That night in Camden was one of those moments for Ellsworth Johnson. He wasn't filled with fear. He wasn't paralyzed. He was, by every account of the man who emerged from that childhood, calculating, deciding, building something internal that would take years to fully construct. And within a year of that night, his family made a decision. Send the boy north. To Brooklyn first, to live with an older sister. He was 13 years old. He carried a change of clothes and the weight of everything Camden had tried to make him into. Harlem didn't welcome Bumpy Johnson. It recognized him. The Harlem he arrived in was unlike anything Camden had prepared him for. It was loud and fast and layered. There was black wealth here, real wealth, black culture, at a level of sophistication that Camden didn't know existed. The Harlem Renaissance was in full swing. Art, literature, music, ambition. And underneath all of it, the jazz and the poetry and the church hats, was something else. An economy. A parallel economy, operating in the gaps the legitimate world had refused to fill. Numbers running, street-level commerce, territory, hierarchy, power. Bumpy Johnson saw it immediately. He'd grown up watching white men in Camden use law and violence to control everything. Here, men who looked like him were doing something similar, but on their own terms. Building something, running something. He was a teenager with no money, no connections, and no name anyone knew yet. But he had the thing Camden had tried to beat out of him and failed. A refusal to accept someone else's ceiling. Bumpy Johnson spent over 4 decades building his empire in Harlem. He went to prison. He came back. He fought the Italian mob for control of the numbers game. He lost people. He buried people. He became, by most accounts, one of the most powerful and feared figures in mid-century New York. And he never went back to South Carolina. Not once. People who knew him said he didn't talk about South Carolina often. When he did, it wasn't with nostalgia. It wasn't with bitterness either. Not exactly. It was more like clarity. The way you talk about something you fully processed and moved past. He didn't go back because there was nothing to go back to. The boy Camden tried to build, the boy who would look at the ground, who would apologize to men who weren't worth his time, who would accept a ceiling and call it a life. That boy never fully formed. Camden tried to make him. Harlem finished what Camden couldn't. South Carolina didn't lose Bumpy Johnson. It produced him. It created the pressure that made him. And then it had no idea what to do with what it had made. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson died on July 7, 1968. A heart attack at a restaurant in Harlem, surrounded by his people. He was 62 years old. He built an empire on streets that tried to tell him he didn't belong anywhere. He became a name that outlasted everyone who tried to erase it. And somewhere in Camden, South Carolina, the red clay roads are still there. The pine trees, the silence. The town that didn't know what it had expelled until decades later, when the whole world knew the name Bumpy Johnson. If you want the full story of Bumpy Johnson's rise in Harlem, that's the next video.